And we are live on Facebook. Okay, Dr. Phillip Chavez is in studio. We are going to get started on our next episode. We're good to go.
You're listening to Trending with Timmerie, offering an eternal perspective on today's hottest topics. National speaker Timmerie Millington has been a passionate advocate for life as long as you can remember, helping Gen X through Z answer the call to true feminism and authentic manhood. Timmerie holds a master's degree in biblical theology, and she covers and speaks
Hello, it's great to be with all of you. We have so much ahead of us today. We'll be talking about really finding a greater balance in love and conversation, but authentic truth with regard to the church's teaching on the issues of same-sex attraction and transgenderism. We'll also be talking about how these very topics pose extreme challenges for young people, young boys, young girls, 13 years and even younger, with just the pressure on the schools to accept different gender ideologies and come out as cisgender if you're cisgender, or transgender if you're transgender. And if you don't know what cisgender is, stay tuned. We'll be explaining what exactly that is. Also, really great news surrounding free speech on college campuses, but also how does that change the culture that is already prevalent on college campuses for so many people who are feeling incredibly silenced. We'll also be talking about relativism and how hundreds of church leaders, a small handful of individual Catholics, not necessarily the leaders, but a number of Methodists, Baptists, Lutherans, Presbyterians, United Church of Christ have all signed a letter supporting abortion on demand. We'll be coming up with that and much more, so don't go away. I have in studio with me Dr. Phillip Chavez of the Men's Academy, who has a PhD in marriage and family studies, especially looking into theology of the culture, bringing theology into the culture to really help us understand these key issues with a lens of faith as well as psychology.
Exactly, and so that we can all grow into the character that God created us to be, body and spirit.
It's wonderful to have you. You can find Dr. Phillip Chavez and his work at the Men's Academy. Be sure to check out the notes at radiotrending.com for this episode, where there are links to some of his great podcasts, his website, and also where you can purchase more of his data, really diving into the issue of masculinity.
That's right. And I think we find that if we can strengthen a man, his position in the home, and just validate him again as father, try to waken him up to want to have a family, to want to protect life, to want to uphold the good in society, I think we could, again, all these issues we're talking about would be ameliorated.
So just a couple of weeks ago, I was speaking at an event, and one of the young people came up to me, college age, said, trending was so helpful for me in cutting through just the gender ideology that is so rampant on my college campus. All of these courses I have to take where, we'll talk later about what cisgender is, and, practically hundreds now, I'm being dramatic, of gender identities that you could find yourself in. And she said it's just a clear voice citing psychology, social sciences, the truth of the church's teaching, but adding reason. And I was really grateful to hear that. But this past week, I heard a message that really resonated with me. And that is from a young woman who herself shared that she, a number of weeks ago, had been listening to basically a talk on the issue of homosexuality by a Catholic speaker. And it was so hard for me hearing the hatred for the LGBTQ community. And she said, then just a week later, I attended one of your talks, and I was just overwhelmed with the love and compassion and affirmation there was. And she said, hearing the former talk before was very hard for me because this is a cross that I personally carry. And so, but when I heard you, it really allowed me to understand the truth of essentially what is being taught, and that there is not hatred for a person who's carrying this cross of same-sex attraction. And gosh, it brought me to tears, Dr. Chavez, just hearing this, because there's such inadequate conversation coming from our own leaders about the issue of same-sex attraction.
That's right. And going back to your disposition as a speaker, as you know, it's important above all to love those to whom you're addressing. And it's not so much about convincing, though you want to do that. And it's not so, it is something about teaching, but it's all mostly about a dynamic of loving those to whom you're addressing. And when you genuinely tend to loving them as you're reaching out toward them, they experience that, they feel that, and they're far more receptive to whatever you have to give. And so, yes, if we make presentations a matter of winning debates or just showing where we're right, or that somebody should buy into our position, or that they should just believe what the church says, if they don't believe it or they don't receive it with some sense of charity and love, it's not going to easily be received.
Well, and this is what's so sad, and I really hope everyone listens here, because I wanted to share this story, not because like, oh great, someone really identified with what I was sharing.
Sure.
I am so grateful that this was said, because we all need to be aware of how we're talking about the issue, because
Sure.
The reality is the church is very clear.
Sure.
Everyone is called to chastity, inside and outside of marriage. No matter what sin you yourself struggle with, we're
Sure.
all called to a virtuous moral life, to live in God's sanctifying grace that is
Right.
given by the grace of the sacraments, and that is how we live this life. And different people have tendencies to different sins.
That's right.
Different people have different crosses that they carry. But here's the problem. People will just read the incredible clarity of the Catechism of the Catholic Church on same-sex attraction and leave it without talking about the love there is for the person.
That's right.
I remember Daniel Mattson, he has this book I strongly recommend everyone read. It's called Why I Don't Call Myself Gay. We're going to have to get him on the show again here soon. I interviewed him a number of years ago. And he talks about how the church is teaching on referring to same-sex actions as intrinsically disordered was something that he, even when he was living that lifestyle, sexually active lifestyle, was very grateful for as he was going through his conversion, because it spoke truth. It didn't say you are disordered.
Sure.
It said those actions are disordered and apart from who you are. And we need to reunite who you are through the sacraments with the kingdom of God.
Sure. And again, yeah, gosh, the truth has so many elements to it when it's projected well. But certainly it is a spirit of prayer and a spirit of loving others. But in trusting that the Spirit will work when we do speak with clarity and charity at the same time. Souls, and especially those who are in desperate situations. And I find, too, that those who are agonizing in some way, they are looking for truth. They are looking for an answer, even if it does challenge them, because if they're even in immoral state of affairs, that their minds could still be reached by some sense of hope, which they know that these acts that they commit are usually that are inordinate or intrinsically disordered, do lead them into a lives of despair. There's no happiness that comes from that.
Right.
And so when they do authentically and sincerely try to listen to the truth, oftentimes it can be well received. But as many will tell you, these are things they often never hear.
And I want you to listen to me when I say this. If you're sitting there wherever you are, you're on a run, you're driving in your car, I hope you will hear this. There are many faithful Catholics who have carried the cross of same-sex attraction.
That's right.
And are faithful to what the church teaches in chastity, and you often have no idea. I think we're blessed with some public figures such as Joseph Chiambra and Daniel Mattson, who have been willing to say these are crosses that they carry.
Sure.
This is the sinful life that they lived. This is the struggle they now experience, and this is the great goal of the upward call of Christ Jesus, that
Exactly.
they are fighting to live with the virtue of chastity. And I would say sometimes they're living the virtue of chastity better than many young adult faithful Catholics are in heterosexual relationships today.
And that definitely could be the case, and then again, going back to what you said the last episode, it's this whole aspect of redemptive suffering and really looking at the cross. And it's very, very hard to carry these kinds of things without walking with Christ and carrying his cross. And so that imagery, to know that he's walking with us, he's covering us, he's allied himself to us. And really, in some way, for these people carrying these crosses, they're walking in Christ in a different dimension they may not realize, but we are truly walking in Christ's sufferings.
Amen. That's Dr. Phillip Chavez of the Men's Academy. You are listening to Trending with Timmerie. here's a really key thing that I want to touch on, because when we talk about the issue of homosexuality, and some people are so harsh and some people are overly empathetic. I think some
Sure.
people are overly empathetic to the point where it's approval. It's no longer empathy. It's no longer understanding, wow, this is a really
That's right.
difficult experience you're having. You are suffering. You are struggling. Instead, they just say, oh, I'll approve you, whatever you do. And then there's another side where people have, and I was talking to a group of people the other day. They said, why are some people so harsh with regard to same-sex activity? And I said, well, let me ask you this. Could you understand why some people have an absolute aversion to actually thinking about the sexual act of two people of the same sex? And the group of students said yes. I said, I think that people misplacedly place that aversion to the act to those people, and they have a hard time separating it out.
That's
And it
true.
turns
I
to
think that's right.
hatred and ugliness, because this is the thing with the issue of abortion. A lot of people get angry at the people who are talking about abortion because they don't want to be faced with the horror of what abortion is.
Sure. Yeah, and so yes, and so what we don't want, or what these people oftentimes don't want us to see, is the reality that's behind the actions, and two, even the effects and what it does to the family, what it does to other relationships. Oftentimes, all the things that are found, same-sex attraction, whatnot, or those relationships, there's often very devastating results and often very broken lives.
Absolutely. I want to talk here. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie. That's Dr. Phillip Chavez of the Men's Academy. Please find out more about his work. I'm tweeting it out at Timmerie. You can find his website,
themensacademy.org.
and all links to that at radiotrending.com. Recently, you were giving a talk on the topic of patriarchy.
That's right.
And you were on university campuses, and you saw just the shocking silence on campus
That's
over
right.
these issues.
That's right. And in fact, that, I think I mentioned to you, I think I recall this, when I was asked to speak on the topic of patriarchy, and actually using that title, I was in some way shocked. I mean, I don't even use the term, So I speak of the reality, I just don't use that term. But I don't know if I told you too, Timmerie, that presentation was only accepted 2 days after the presidential order. So had President Trump not issued that presidential order that he did, I probably wouldn't have spoken there.
So just for those who don't know what we're talking about, so recently President Trump ended up initiating an executive order for free speech on college campuses. And essentially, if public campuses are silencing free speech on their campus, they're going to lose their federal funding, not only for the schools, but for research that many institutions are receiving up to billions of dollars in research for. And so I really hope that this executive order reinforcing laws that are already put in place for free speech really are enforced. But like you said, had that executive order not been initiated, they actually weren't going to allow you to come on campus and essentially talk about the importance of men leading and taking responsibility.
That's right. And interestingly enough, it was last night I met with the fraternity, and I was kind of shocked. There was nothing but positive input from the presentation about manhood, manliness, the role of the father, and to what it is to be a beloved son, a beloved daughter of God. And so even the women too, in fact, there were two professors of women's studies who stayed till the end and had some complimentary things to say. But the men told me there too, he says, it's like we've been in a desert and you've given us drops of water. I was very moved by that, Timmerie. Normally, I mean, not only did I not speak at secular universities, it's the first time I've done that in this country, but I don't necessarily speak to college-age students. My demographic is usually middle-aged guys, 30 to 55. That's somewhat where most of my work has landed. In fact, I take that back. Virtually all of my work has landed. But I found I really enjoyed myself speaking to these men because they were far more open than I anticipated. And they were far more willing to learn the truth. And were somewhat in awe that there's such a beauty and such a dignity to manliness that when they could see it, and especially as I try to always communicate these things as they're in the human heart, the men embraced that. I was amazed.
I imagine many came out saying, thank you for calling me into my mission.
That's right. And yeah, as I mentioned, even to the ladies, in fact, you should have seen the women's studies class actually march in. Okay, and they marched out when they had to at the end of their class. But in any case, I said, well, ladies, deep down, don't you want a selfless and sacrificial leader, protector, and provider in your life? And there were some of them nodding, and they were just kind of stunned. Yeah, deep down, that's what they want. And so again, to communicate all of these things from where they land in the human heart, because they are true, and they have to do with sexuality and our mission, that our Lord will put also that desire in our heart, and those truths are in some way latent in our hearts. And when they're woken up that way, instead of being dogmatic, but showing people how these things land in our own experience and our own feelings, it's powerful. And when students are receptive, it's just a powerful thing, and they're able to receive these truths very willingly. In fact, we went out to dinner afterwards, and the guys didn't want to let me go. They just didn't want to let me go.
But that's such an example of these young people, I have to tell you, are hungry. And I think one of my favorite groups to work with, Adrian's right now, has been college students, because it's a shift. The last couple of years, I can tell you from working with them very intimately.
Sure.
Just now, this last year, they are more hungry, more interactive, more open, and willing to share, well, this is what I think, or this is where I'm struggling, versus a couple years ago, it was more so, this is what I think, I'm not going to change my mind. I don't care what you have to say. You're wrong, you're wrong. There's a humility coming about in young people on college campuses, and I think it's because they have been hit so hard.
I think that's right.
By this radical agenda. They're saying what's up and what's down, and where they're finding it is in the church.
That's right. And even yesterday, I was with a college student. We walked around the transgender office and their facility and whatnot at Cal State Dominguez Hills. And I find, yes, he was speaking out how bold they are, and yes, how boldly the professors are getting more anti-life and all the rest. So it's raising an awareness, at least to these students, saying, there's something really wrong here. And so we're seeing that. But also, I hope too, this is also a movement of the Spirit, Timmerie, that for some reason now we're experiencing some movement of the Spirit to touch hearts and souls.
Absolutely. So even if this free speech executive order isn't fully accepted on some campuses, and many people who hold to traditional views about men and women and marriage and life, the sanctity of human life, you can still speak up. We have to continuously find ways tactfully to be wise and conversational. It used to be that the university setting was an incredible place of academia and intense debate. You, if you're a college student, can bring that debate back onto the campus.
That's right. And for most of us, it just starts with the people we meet, the people we encounter. But again, I think as you've seen things and I've seen things now, there's so much hope to be had by students who are hungry, who are looking for truths, because if they aren't getting the truth, the intellect wants the truth, and if it's getting error or it's not getting the truth, there's going to be a natural hunger developing. And then when they start to see it and you show them how that rings with their experience, how it rings with their human heart, they're very receptive.
That's Dr. Phillip Chavez of the Men's Academy. Learn more about him at radiotrending.com. You can also let us know topics you might like to hear discussed next time he is in studio with us. I want to talk about this article that came out on the Daily Mail, UK Daily Mail, talking from the perspective of a mom, and I want to qualify her statements with this. This is a mom of a 13-year-old young daughter who has intentionally sent her daughter to an all-girls school. Never says if it's Catholic or anything like that. I don't believe that it is, but she sent her daughter to an all-girls school. Now, to qualify her comments, this is really interesting, and I'll send out a link to the article. It's worth reading all the way through. It's a long one, but essentially what the mom states is, at one point, if my daughter, when she's older, were to come out to me, let's say a young adult or so forth, and say that she was gay and so forth, I would be totally supportive, love her right where she's at, be okay with it. So this is someone who's completely accepting of same-sex activity and so forth. So this is the perspective this woman's coming from. She has shared that on her daughter's, essentially the equivalent here in the United States, middle school campus of all girls, that there has been extreme transgender, pro same-sex attraction, pro come out as cisgender trans on campus, to the point where this is all she hears her daughters and the other girls talking about. Well, are you gay? Are you transgender? Are you cisgender? Have you come out? I like you. Do you like me? The very thing she wanted to protect her daughter from and going to an all-girls school, she's found has come out as a rampant agenda on campus, and she's not happy as a mom about it, nor is the daughter.
Yeah, and it's throwing her daughter in you know, an emotional turmoil, and she's even torn about many things, and she's meant to feel, even though she's you know, in her own I guess her own heterosexual state, she's made to feel guilty that that's what she has, or that's her orientation. And so she feels marginalized, as I understand it, if she's not using the proper gender pronouns, and she's being corrected and berated by other students for this.
And by the way, this girl is totally heterosexual.
Yes.
I mean, and she's being criticized, like you said, for being heterosexual.
That's right.
For even in any of the students who slightly speak up against this agenda or criticize. So the mom shared one story where they had a transgender individual, a person who identifies as transgender, come in and give this whole lecture about transgender, basically gay sexuality. And essentially at the end, the question was asked, so, okay, who liked the presentation? And she said her daughter said she raised her hand out of fear because if she did not, she would be labeled as transphobic. And so all these kids are giving rave reviews about things they disagree with out of fear.
I think so. And there's another part of this that I think we need to look at least impartially. You know, it's interesting how children have a very high sense of justice, being fair and whatnot. And I think what's happened is these transgender and pro-gay advocates, they're trying to make this a cause of justice and appeal to the child's sense of justice. And so this is why the other children in our school, or the fellow students, they're so strong in advocacy for this, because it gives them an issue of justice to circle around.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, you know, young girls, 13-year-old girls, should not be having to think all the time going to a same-sex school, whether or not another girl fancies her or not. She should not have to suffer because she doesn't say she's gender fluid or gay or transgender.
That's right. Or not have to fear that she might have same-sex attraction just because she has a friend who's a girl that she just wants to be friends with.
Now, people tell people like this young average 13-year-old girl who, like many 13-year-old girls, are struggling with friendships, struggling with the changes of her own body, is facing, you know, the insecurity that so many girls in this age range experience. Now she's also being told that, well, you need to come out as cisgender. So here's something we've got to talk about. Does anyone know what cisgender means? I know a lot of people are going, what on earth is that? Cisgender is to be heterosexual.
That's right, to be normal.
To
we use those terms.
Yeah, it is essentially to identify with the biological sex that you are.
That's right.
And so now they're teaching young kids that you need to, yes, you might be born one thing, but you at some point need to come out and clarify what you are.
That's right. As being cisgender is just one of many options which you could possibly be.
Yes. This is the challenge that young girls, young boys are facing. In this article, I'm grateful for this mom, and I started by prefacing it with she's okay with this agenda with adults. She's not okay with it when it's being forced upon her daughter.
That's right. Because did she say, too, it's become the subject of discussion that her daughter engages with her, and she would otherwise like to think her daughter would be thinking about other things. So I guess what was inferred there, that the daughter's actually very much preoccupied with all this.
Yeah.
When that's against against nature for a girl to be so preoccupied with these things. But it's all over now, and it seems to be the issue for which has taken most awareness in her own student experiences.
A couple weeks ago, I had on the show Patrick Reading. We were talking about his experience in shaping young men for a number of years, and we were talking about trends among young people and how, you know, back in the day, I was talking about how for girls, and even happens today, one girl suddenly decides that she's bulimic or anorexic, and next thing you know, a bunch of other teenage girls are following the same trend. Well, here we are. Teenagers are incredibly impacted so easily. We're going to be talking about the impact soon about 13 Reasons Why and how all of a sudden there was a spike in suicide in the months after. It's been published in a number of psychological journals now. Well, here's the same thing, this gender ideology. Young people are insecure, trying to find themselves. Well, that person came out as gay or transgender. Maybe I will too.
That's right. It's unfortunate. It's that power of suggestion that, as you pointed out, in times of inadequacy and weakness and and own indecisiveness, those things take root and tend to make us feel fearful and guilty and all those other feelings.
Here's a great opportunity for a challenge to parents. Please listen up. We need you to get involved. Here in the state of California, we're facing a lot of forced curriculum in the public school system. I know a lot of people that have put their hands up, no more public school. That being said, you can speak up and do something. Talk to your state legislator. Know what laws are going on in your state. Check out some of my posts that I put up specifically for the state of California, but know what's in your kids' curriculum. Okay. Excitement. Set. Let's go ahead and we are good to go. Timmerie here. I'm really excited to have a couple programs I'd like to invite some of you to participate in here in Southern California, Los Angeles, and also San Diego. There's a Vox Vitae camp taking place for teenagers, specifically teaching them on what is Catholicism, how do we live out and preach our faith, what is abortion, how do we talk about it, how do we deal as teenagers with this issue like we were talking about before of transgender ideology and it being forced on us, and so much more, whether it's talking about STDs, being aware of the impact of sexual promiscuity. So that's one great thing to check out. There's also a program for adults with Vox Vitae, people such as Doug Berry, Pam Stenzel, Father Frank Pavone, Matt Walsh, and a number of others will be there to talk about the importance of morality and for these young people and for the adults to be a light to the world in great darkness right now. I'll also be speaking at the Couples for Christ International Youth Conference in San Diego. So for more details, you can check that out. In the studio today with me is Dr. Phillip Chavez of the Men's Academy. He is doing incredible work, calling men into their mission, challenging men to wake up. This is, why people such as Jordan Peterson have been so popular. Sure. Because Jordan Peterson's saying grow up, and you're here helping to provide the roadmap of this is what it looks like as a man. Exactly.
And again, as we spoke earlier, men are quite receptive when they hear the truth, hear it in clarity, and hear it in charity. They rise up. And of course, every man wants a mission. He wants to be clear what his purpose in life is. And when he starts seeing his natural missions, he has a leader, protector, and provider, and is summoned to do that. He wants to rise up, and they just need more to be pointed to the direction where they can serve in those ways.
Wonderful. You can find out more about some of his events at themensacademy.org. So be sure to check that out. I want to talk about how relative we are becoming in our attitude about abortion. We are at a point where so many people are pro-abortion, pro-life, personally opposed to abortion, yet they're advocating because they think other people should have total autonomy to make their own decisions. You guys,
that's right.
We're at the point, we just saw this letter come out over the last couple of weeks, where essentially Tennessee is looking at passing the heartbeat bill, and the governor, Bill Lee, has said that he would support it. And so a number of over 150 leaders in various churches, Methodist, Baptist, Lutheran, Presbyterian, have written this letter supporting abortion on demand and asking the governor to as well.
It really is shocking to look at some of the arguments they're using, but it's about, well, let's just trust women, trust mothers. So they're appealing to the sense of, trust in their judgment, which we want to do that, on a variety of things. Trust women's judgment, the way she raises her children, the way she does a number of things, but not to trust her if that decision in question is about an abortion. It's interesting how I saw in other language too. Well, we shouldn't really be talking about this. We really do need to be talking about how we can help families make a living wage. And that's true. We should talk about that. But it's interesting how they can twist truth to deviate from an issue which should be talking about, and in this case should be dealt with.
Well, these should be morally upstanding individuals, or at least people who are teaching what it is to be morally upstanding individual in living a life that follows God. And yet these exact people are going against the great commandments of the Bible. They are going against their own biblical upbringing, their own biblical worldview. I mean, even if you were to just look at this from the perspective of the Old Testament, I don't talk about abortion a lot from the perspective of faith, but Old Testament, one of the worst things you could do, liable to be killed for, is if you were to harm a pregnant woman. Pregnancy in the Old Testament, to be able to conceive was a great gift. And when women found themselves barren, that's some of the greatest stories of both Old and New Testament comes about when a woman is unable to have a child, and by the grace of God, she finally conceives.
So, Timmerie, I mean, in your opinion, what do you think's happening to these religious leaders when they start advocating for murder? What's going on?
I think they become so entrenched in the culture. They want to be relevant. They want to be in with the crowd. They want to say, yeah, people can make their own decisions, forgetting the importance of the soul's ultimate destiny. I think this comes to a lack of belief in heaven and hell.
I guess that could be, in other words, not being aware of those ramifications. I just kind of wonder too if it's just kind of a cowardness that's coming through some of these religious leaders.
You look shocked just hearing this. What do you think?
Yeah, it is perplexing. It is perplexing because what's perplexing is the fact that they would actually issue a document to this effect. If anything, it used to be in the past, if those are the positions they held, they'd be silent about it, right? They wouldn't say anything. It just would be something they would not want to bring up. And so, again, I think what's happening too with many of these people, they're lost. They've lost the grace of God, and they lost the power of the Spirit. And I think God is, as the saying goes, has hardened their hearts. At least He has not given them that gift of the Spirit to see their ways. But I mean, to actually issue a forthright document in this kind of declaration, which I don't know if there was any incumbent duty or expectation of them to do this. In some way, that's what I find kind of shocking. But ultimately, as far as the men are concerned, anyways, and I don't speak for the women on this one, but the male religious leaders, they've become, in some ways, if they're not standing up for the good, standing up with courage, they've become cowards. And this is what cowards do. They submit to the culture.
It's also very easy, and we've seen this within the Catholic Church as well, to turn our faith into political activism.
Interesting.
Social activism, social justice. So many people have done this, and I think that this is the same thing happening within the Methodist, Baptist, Presbyterian, Lutheran churches here, is they are turning their work to call people into conversion, instead to turn into groups that promote social activism, welfare programs, and so forth, versus the responsibility of the church is to hold to absolute moral truth and to live by absolute moral truth and to live your life in worship and service to God in union with that truth. That's
right. And that moral truth, Timmerie, I guess would be considered, well, it is commuted or rather imparted or taught through authority. And I think what's happening is not only is the authority of the actual minister being taken into question, is that even on a deeper level, many of these religious leaders are failed now to concede to or submit to the authority of God Himself. I mean, maybe that's how distant they have gone.
You're listening to Trending with Timmerie. That's Dr. Phillip Chavez. Would you say, Dr. Chavez, that also these religious leaders are also following this attitude? I personally wouldn't have an abortion, but I want to make sure that other people can and have access to it. Is this the same argument being lived out here?
It might be, because they're cowardly to speak out in behalf of the truth. They're cowardly to actually take an actual stand. And so they're taking the safe route.
I think that this is a wrong attitude to take as a leader.
Sure.
And this is where it's difficult. There's a difference between saying, I'm going to have to bring this up, and I'm wondering whether or not I should, but that phrase, who am I to judge?
Right.
Who am I to judge? Okay, it's one thing to say, who am I to sit here and condemn you? Now, I think that there's a point when someone's literally killing someone in the other room.
Sure.
There's a condemnation that can take place and should take place publicly.
Sure.
That being said, there is a level of condemnation that should not enter into the level of hatred when someone's battling a sin, for example.
That's right. And we got to be careful too. I think sometimes we've used this word judgment in the sense of passing sentence over. No, that's not our duty to pass sentence over. But as
that's God's duty.
Exactly. But our duty is to point out error where we see it, to point out not just error, in terms of the truth, but to point out wrong action, all the more so grave action. And so, yes, it's incumbent upon us to make Christians to make judgments. This person is doing right or wrong based upon the commandments, and to tell them, you are doing wrong.
And so this is where truth comes in.
That's
you
right.
Can't say, who am I to judge, and say that as a Christian without bringing truth into it. So I get people who are trying to be, I'm trying not to be judgmental. I know Jesus talks about, here you are looking at the branch, in someone else's life, but you've got a log in your own life. Really, we are called to recognize that ultimately the person's salvation is between that person and God. But that doesn't mean that the way other people are behaving cannot be called out, because how do we become converted unless we challenge and forge each other?
That's right. And they can be called out in this sense. It's not the one telling them this who's judging. It's God has made the judgment, and they're just simply imparting what God has taught, the judgment that God has made. They're not making that judgment. They're simply just declaring what God has taught them in terms of what is wrong action.
Absolutely. Well, and this is something we can understand apart from the Bible as well. And this is what's, I think, a really important point. I was starting to read Pope Benedict's letter that he recently released about a month ago now. I'm very behind in having read it. But what I've read so far, one of the key things that he talks about is how over the last 60 to 80 years, essentially, we've seen that the Catholic Church used to really teach in many ways, especially on the issues of morality, from the perspective of nature, natural law. We could also enter into the field of psychology, right? That's natural law, understanding basic truths. And how it was really over the last 60 to 80 years, all of a sudden the church is like, biblical proof, biblical proof, biblical proof.
Interesting.
We have to remember that although these different groups, the Methodists, the Baptists, the Lutherans, etc., are suddenly advocating for abortion in Tennessee, maybe they're recognizing that only holding to a biblical worldview is problematic when it's not really recognizing that nature is consistent with God's revelation in sacred scripture.
Exactly. And they don't think that way probably because they're not educated to see nature or to see things based upon nature. It's simply by God's declaration, him saying so. Yeah, so for many, yes, who haven't been studied to see the intrinsic right or wrong in the natural act of a thing, it's going to be otherwise hard to uphold these things, even from a supernatural standpoint.
We leave you with this. Remember, grace perfects nature.
Very good.
And we need to be reminded of this balance. Last comment, just cut it. Okay, let's run the timer a little bit. Last segment here. Let me run through. And we are good to go. Here we are talking about upcoming battles to take place within the Supreme Court regarding the firing of employees based on sexual orientation and gender identity. This is a topic I've really been looking forward to talking about, because I haven't talked about this probably in quite a while, I feel like. Okay. Dr. Phillip Chavez is here with me, and I will be really interested. Let's scale this back for a second.
Sure.
I would love to get your opinion here on the issue. Say there is a Catholic school, and Catholic school, good, faithful Catholic school, they're trying to live according to the mission and precepts of the Catholic Church.
Sure.
They have, these guidelines, for example, at San Francisco, where Archbishop Corleone has implemented, everyone who they're hiring needs to uphold these specific moral outlines.
Sure.
We're not obtaining an abortion, we're not promote abortion, are not living in same-sex attractive relationships, we're not promote it, etc. Should a institution be able to hire according to their mission?
Absolutely. I mean, part of their mission is, in this sense, to be faith-based. And so if they don't hire accordingly, then they're actually in some way defying or going against the actual mission of the school.
Now, would you say there's a difference between a janitor who, let's say a janitor, it's discovered a couple years into them working there, is in a same-sex relationship.
Okay.
And this is discovered. Would you say there's a difference between the janitor who maybe isn't sharing about this relationship with the kids? And again, we could get further into this. And a teacher who's sharing about their same-sex quote-unquote marriage and they're talking to the kids about it. Could you just say there's a difference in position there?
Well, I think that's right. I mean, in this case, there is a difference. I mean, in this case, the janitor he isn't directly involved with the formation of the children, but he is in an indirect way. And so usually, and oftentimes it's the case that it's very hard for somebody who's even working in a secondary position or support position in the school that lifestyle is not known in some way, because word does get around. And so in this case, it'd be in at least implicitly in child's mind, even a parent's mind, that there's an endorsement of that kind of behavior on behalf of the janitor.
See, and I think this is where the problem becomes difficult. Universities, organizations, crisis pregnancy centers should be able to hire to mission. You should be able to hire a crisis pregnancy counselor that believes sex is meant to be between one man and one woman within the sacred bond of marriage.
Sure.
And these should be the people counseling women in crisis pregnancy. A person who is teaching children about the Catholic faith should be living what the church teaches. And
Sure.
if they're not following that, it should be acceptable to fire them. However, I think that we start to get into waters that are a little more difficult. When, say, we're talking, there have been cases where, okay, it's a school janitor. And, you know, what level of interaction or how much are they sharing about this relationship? In the ideal world, there should be an intimacy among the staff, that everyone has some level of knowing each other and knowing something about each other's lives. But I think in today's world, it's very easy to have someone in your staff who's just going about their work.
Sure.
You don't really know a lot about maybe their family and certain experiences. And then suddenly maybe this comes out and say that school janitor who's in a same-sex relationship is fired. That could be a little unjust when this janitor maybe never said anything to the kids. It wasn't commonly known.
Sure. Yeah, okay, so yeah, we're tackling a number of things and complexities here. But you make a very good point about collegiality. And yes, all the staff and support staff in some way should have a relationship and in some way work together, but you do find that people are segmented and separated. And yes, even janitors should feel part of the light in some way, life of the school, especially when they're present when the students are.
I'm only pushing out against this wall really hard because here we are with the Supreme Court about to hear this case having to do with the firing of employees based on sexual orientation and gender identity. Two key examples that are coming up in this case have to do, for example, I think with a school teacher, like a skydiving coach. Sorry, a skydiving coach is one example, and a child welfare worker who were, for example, let's say, for the sake of this, in same-sex relationships or identifying as transgender. I personally would feel a little uncomfortable if I had a lady on my back who identified as same-sex attractive.
Sure.
I might even be uncomfortable with a gentleman who, and here's why. Because sometimes when we experience an interaction with someone who is outwardly living a, let's say, gay lifestyle, sometimes they're overly looking at things sexually. I'm not saying this is always the case. And so there might be a level of discomfort having someone on my back jumping out of the sky in this case.
That's right.
So could there maybe be somewhat of an understanding if this fact is being shared too much with people who are taking skydives and suddenly they feel like they have to fire this employee? Might make sense given the context.
Sure, and yes, this employee would have maybe a negative effect upon those participating. But you know, Timmerie, I guess it really goes back in some way. I mean, if we really want to look at this in principle, you know, it used to be that people were in prison for acts of same-sex acts. You know, sodomy used to be outlawed. And so in some way, the church and correspondingly, the state and correspondingly the school does have a right to uphold morality. I mean, that's the way things should be, even from the natural law. So states and governments used to uphold this in the natural order. So yes, I mean, the state does have the right to, as we say, legislate morality. That's what it's supposed to do. Now, in this case, remember, it needs to legislate morality, especially in those things which pertain to family life and the preservation of sound family life. And if there's somebody living in grave sin, especially same-sex attraction, that should not be part of people should not necessarily be exposed to that, because it's such a grave offense to family life.
Let's say specifically children. Let's say
Sure, all the more so.
specifically in
Minors.
educational. Let's say specifically in child welfare programs. These are the examples of cases that are being brought forward. Now, I want to make it very clear. If you work for an accounting firm, if you work for a pizza parlor, if you work for a medical doctor,
Sure.
Even getting into the medical doctor area might again enter into different waters. If you have same-sex attraction, I don't think you should necessarily be fired for that. It's if maybe, say, the doctor is violating someone's body, or maybe someone's not comfortable
Sure.
given that same-sex attraction. There's a difference there between your accountant, your real estate agent.
Right.
We can't dehumanize a person
That's
and
right.
say that you're not worthy of work, but we can uphold that a certain level of moral upstanding virtue is being lived out when working with, say, the young.
Yeah, or in this case, moral protection.
Mhm.
So this is to do so. It would be to legislate the protection of the young, and so it's really to look at the rights of the young people who could potentially be harmed or intimidated or in some way disaffected. So it's really is in many things, it's the rights of the child that that have precedence over the rights of the employee in the sense.
And this is where it's important. Kids shouldn't be having to think about same-sex attraction, transgenderism, and those kids who are having to think it because
Sure.
maybe they're experiencing it or they're being exposed to it within their own homes. Those are the exception. Those are the kids we're working with and helping with. We shouldn't be forcing this agenda or this ideology on young people. And I think that's
right.
the bottom line, and why this coming to the Supreme Court, I hope that the court ruling down the road is one of justice with regard to young people, but not of hatred
Sure.
with regard to people who are experiencing a serious struggle in our culture.
That's right. And again, we don't want to minimize the struggle that's going on with many people, even those same-sex attractions you mentioned earlier, living a chaste moral life, because it's difficult, and we should empathize with that and help these people to the extent that we can. But again, the students and parents, really their rights, all the more so in education, their rights are the highest. Their rights prevail over teachers and staff. And so it's their interests and their good that must be upheld first.
We also have to remember that what we're talking about is also Title VII, right? The Civil Rights Act having to do with equal opportunity
Sure.
of employment. Now, equal opportunity doesn't mean that you deserve everything. If
That's right.
if you have an employee
That's right.
coming in and they don't meet the qualifications, there's something clear in how they're interacting that calls into question their ability to work with professionalism, with
Sure.
efficiency, and at the level they're required to. You should be able to decide whether or not to hire that person.
Exactly.
This is the problem. If suddenly the word sex in Title VII suddenly becomes about transgenderism and sexual orientation, this could become very problematic, because then suddenly people are going to say, well, you didn't hire me because I'm gay.
Exactly.
And the reality is that a true Christian does not look at a person as gay. They look at a person as a person who might experience this attraction. And
Sure.
if that attraction is being lived out in an area, especially that could influence other people based on that profession, specifically with children, yes, we should be able to determine, in some cases, the hiring or firing.
That's right, because even as those with same-sex attraction will confess to, if they're living a chaste life, even it is very difficult to withhold that desire. It's to control that, to manage that. It's very difficult. And again, we don't want to put children in undue danger where that may be present.
Right. Yet at the same time, we can argue there are people like you and I talked about earlier who are living with having experienced same-sex attraction. They have been living chaste lifestyles for years.
Sure.
It is a cross that they carry. And
Yeah.
then oftentimes I have to say these are people of great humility. They do not share
Yes.
it with many people who are
That's
not
right.
living out on this. And those people, I think there's a difference between someone like that potentially working within certain systems
That's true.
and someone who's living a lifestyle that they're forcing and advocating for.
That's true. And so, yeah, again, as you mentioned, we're into these are very difficult things to sort out. And I think we ought to emphasize too, that at the end of the day, we look for the church for guidance. We look to see what the church has said to support these positions and try to defer as much as we can to what the church has taught, because these are difficult to sort out on our own.
Absolutely. Okay, wonderful. We are going to go ahead and end that segment. You guys have a great week. We will see you next week.